Good. Thank you, Sarah. Welcome, everybody. This is round 2 of the line-by-line review of the proposed upgrades to the human service data specification. This will be a fishbowl format. We have members of the Open Referral HSDS work group on the call, and they've been preparing for this review for months, and we have folks from the community who are also on the call who are welcome to listen in and participate by chat. If anybody in the chat from outside the work group is bringing up issues that folks on the work group want to discuss in real time, we can invite them into the fishbowl. I'm joined by Howard, who will be helping us take notes from the Open Data Institute. Thank you, Howard. Good to see everybody today. Everybody's in good shape. Great. Okay. So we will be working from the spreadsheet that Mike Thacker put together in reference to the proposal that Mike and Devin put together. I've shared the links to the notes in the chat. And Mike, Devin, do you want to narrate where we're picking up? Excuse me.
Yeah, row 93, which is, and I'm hoping we got through some of the most complicated stuff, but row 93, which is the phone table of the spreadsheet. And
do you want to give us a sense of, we'll see how long this takes, but do you have a sense of where we're aiming to go for, and the key highlights along the way on this call?
Yeah, I mean, I think last time we covered a lot of the details. So we looked at things like the services and the organization table, and we talked a little, although we haven't yet got to all the taxonomy things about attributes, which has helped a lot. We created a separate tag for a tab in the spreadsheet for topics, which were things that we felt were so complicated they needed a further discussion of their own. And the intention of this is to get through the basics and say yes or no to lots of things so we can get on and produce a version and then maybe have small incremental updates later. There's no particular theme to what we're doing now other than just these are things that are lower down in the HSDS spec. Right at the bottom are things that were in the UK spec that we don't want to continue with, or possibly things in the US or international spec. So although the sheet is 260 rows, we could probably dismiss a lot of what's at the bottom quite quickly. What's in green in the spreadsheet is what was in the HSDS proper and in the UK implementation of it. What's white is just the HSDS, and there are some things in blue which were added by the UK, and we're wanting to hang on to those things that the UK introduced that have proved useful but drop the others.
Right on. And Mike, should we share Mike's screen if you're going to be working through the spreadsheet?
Devin, I can't remember what we did last time. You kindly updated the recommendation tab. Do you also do you want to share, or shall I share, Devin?
Up to you. One other thing I just want to add in the interim. I mean, this is very minor, but I copied the notes from the last. Basically, I made a duplicate in the sheets on the bottom. You can see one's called latest, one's called 722, and one's called topics. I don't know if folks think it would be. I was thinking that it would be useful to kind of freeze the 722 one so that we can. So it's easy for us to see the comments that were made during that meeting, and that this one would be that would kind of continue forward on this, what's called the latest one, but then would be renamed to the date on this sheet. So you can see that's what latest is, just a copy of 722.
So which is the original?
722 is the original.
Okay. All right.
It's the same. It's the same thing. I don't know. I had for some reason I felt like it would be easier to see that, okay, we had these 11 comments from then, and then we could go on. I don't know. Maybe it's just mindless gardening.
Do you want to talk 11 comments, Devin?
Mike, say that again.
Devin, do you want to talk through those 11 comments or just leave them?
I think it would be useful if for this next session we work off just the latest sheet so that we can kind of freeze the 722 sheet as it is, and then when we do a refactoring, we can kind of it'll be slightly easier for us to pull together what happened when.
Great. Okay, so Devin, we're leaving you with the responsibility of determining what the conclusion was, which is going in column V. And
right, I'll sit here and listen and ask questions, try to pipe up with statements of consensus as we go through, and I'll be taking notes in this purple column while I do it. And if you want, I can share my screen, so you're free to not have to share yours, and I can stay on it.
I'm happy to share now. I have started. And Howard's keeping notes, and we'll do some kind of narrative over, sizable changes, not just spelling fixes and whatever afterwards. And I probably should have pointed out that we've got this concept of a full extended version 2.1, or possibly be called version 3, which will have every field that we think is valid. We've then got a view on that for core, which is kind of a subset of fields for people who want an introduction to a simpler version of Open Referral. And we've got a UK implementation which matches what we've got at the moment that we want to keep. But we have this concept of being able to take different filters on the extended scheme known as profiles for different applications. But that doesn't preclude people from adding their own extensions, either by adding attributes or by adding their own tags and their own fields and proposing those for a later version. Okay, so we're at
and I'd add just the main things to keep. The main thing that we're producing here is these two yellow fields. Which is saying, is this going to be core and recommended for every HSDS data set? In 2.1 full means, is it available as a defined specification? And then this purple field is kind of a note on whether, if it's a Y, that means yes, this is whatever's in those yellow fields has been accepted by everybody. And if there's not a Y and there's some notes, it's explaining how we should change those two yellow fields. And that's really the bulk of that's the primary outcome here.
Okay, thank you.
Any questions from anyone in the group about the process before we get into the content? Not hearing any.
Yeah, and the last thing I'd add is just that if you have your name in the comment section on the right, people take a column if they want to have notes that are reflected and kind of like frozen into the document, notes that they want just to keep in mind, us to keep in mind, or notes, of any type, put your name. If your name's not already here, feel free to add a column and put your name, and then write your note in the cell that you want to attach your note to. If your name is here, then just proceed adding stuff there, and we're just going to keep going through.
Yeah, and that applies to anyone, not just work group members. Let's, particularly if something's going to mess you up. Hopefully this will be quite easy. So we're starting with phone. In the UK, we've linked phone to a particular contact, but the international spec allows phone to be associated with a location ID, a service ID, or an organization ID. And I think we're proposing keeping all of those fields. Department, I'm not sure whether department was, it looks like it is in 2.01, and we're suggesting it be deprecated.
I've never used it.
Yeah,
Okay.
first, yeah, I mean, does anyone here have a strong opinion about phones? Does anyone use connecting phones to service, organization, location specifically?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, we have it both
any-
to contacts and every level of structure. So service, organization, site can all have phone numbers.
Yeah.
Okay,
And
so-
what about, and service at location as well?
Yeah,
So we actually don't, yeah, we don't do a level that's different from service. We only have service at locations. So we don't actually treat services as separate from service at location. So
Gotcha.
it's, yes, but, yes, but.
Okay,
we're
Um,
actually expanding into using it that way in Hawaii. Most of my clients aren't using it service at location, but they're discovering that they need to. They need that specificity for some numbers. So we're working on their data to update that right now.
okay. So I think, yeah, it sounds like the only question is department.
yeah, and KL, is that you, Kate, in chat is saying that you don't have department, but you have
No.
title.
Oh, and the title is only when it's tied to a contact. So we've never used department for anything. So I'm fine with that going. And title is only as it's tied to a contact, and you already have title and contact. So
Right.
I don't
So
think it's
great. So we're
That's
saying we
okay.
can drop department and we need everything else, whether or not it exists in every profile. Okay.
So,
Thank
so we're deprecating department.
That's good.
Contact, again, we have one of these issues where the UK associates contact with the service, but the general HSDS allows contact to be located with linked to service at location, which is, I understand what Kate does, and with organization. So we're
Yeah.
proposing keeping all of that and basically keeping everything. Yeah.
If anything, I would add, what's the one that's missing there? It's kind of interesting, the organization service. If anything, I would add location, but I don't have a need for it. So we're just being thorough on that. I don't need to make a big deal about it.
Okay, so we've got service at location, but we've not got contact associated with the location independent of its service. And if
Would
we
they
have
be
no need for that, we'll leave it out for now.
Yeah, come back to it later.
Great.
I mean, maybe we should, just for completeness, add it as a extended. I mean, I know our system allows us to do that. I don't know if we actually, I'd have to look in the data to see if users actually use it. But I can certainly understand why. Like a facility manager would be listed there.
Right. Yeah. I think it's going to end up being something that we go for, but given that our goal right now is just to get to like combining UK and US as quickly as possible, we can do that as a point version later. No problem there.
Or we could just add it right now and then not have to.
Okay. I don't think it hurts anything.
Yeah. So why not just
Okay, so I've added the row. Devon, if you could do everything else, that would be
Yeah.
lovely. Brilliant. And Devon, you're doing all the hard work, because now I'm going to ask you to remind me what we said about physical address and postal address in the last meeting.
Well, let's let the notes do the talking here. So what we decided was we should combine postal and physical address into a single table with a type that defines, and so this is on row 71, is the note. So yeah, combine postal and physical address into a single table, presumably called address. And we should add a care of field to that combined address table, but we should not combine address with the location table.
So we're combining physical and postal, you said?
We're combining physical and postal, and we're calling it address, and we're adding a care of field to the address table. So I think, yeah, maybe we leave physical address here and just copy and paste and insert a new table called address. You want me to perform that operation?
Yeah, if you could.
Yeah, I think I can. Let's see.
Sorry I was typing in the chat. This is probably not something we're going to put in, but I wanted to indicate that we have to keep what is just a string name for the organization separate from it being tied to the organization record or anything like that, because we have cases where there are programs being run that are multiple participating organizations running a program, and the specific contact might tie back to the participating organization, but it's nothing to do with the program being run. And we need to keep track of that. It's not a common situation, and I'm not sure that we want to put it in, but that is something that we have for a specific reason.
Right. Okay.
I know it's weird. Again, I'm not expecting we put it in. I just want to point that out as sort of a situation we deal with rarely, but not so rarely that we would stop doing it.
Okay. I mean, we covered organization and program last time.
No, this is contact specifically. So the issue is with the contact. So basically the contact is not a member of the organization of the program. Again, I know it sounds like a weird situation, but this is usually the case where programs are run with multiple participating agencies. And so the organization who technically might control the funding for the program and be the one that the program is tied to, there may be contacts for the program that don't belong to that organization. It's a weird one, again, but it happens. And it happens often enough that I wouldn't want to take that feature out of ours. I don't know if anyone has run into that or considered it, but that's something that does happen. And we have a field specifically that is just, it's not tying it to an organization record. I want to be clear. It's literally, it's almost like a secondary title saying which organization they're from. Just, again, so putting it out there.
Okay, so you have contact. So against contact, you have a sort of contact organization separate from a link to the organization. Okay.
Correct. And it's really, it's for this specific case where the organization usually financially administering the program, responsible for funding and usually accountability to government or whatever, has multiple participating organizations that actually deliver service. And so there may be contacts that are not from the program owning organization, and we track that. Again, maybe no one else does this, but just
I'd actually
putting it out there.
I wonder if we shouldn't just shoot up a flare and bookmark a topic for later discussion on that one, because Kate, based on what I've heard from you in particular, I'd kind of love to discuss with you. I suspect that at some point HSDS is going to have to expand on the program table a little bit. It might be suitable for solving a certain need where we have interagency programs that you're talking about. I've started working with a couple of those that use our service, and they're a little bit hairy from the current data schema. They literally have multiple organizations and with different relationships, you know, or parallel relationships, but often different relationships to that program. And otherwise, you know, it's organized similarly where it has services and locations and things like that. So it's almost like a buffer between organization and services that allows us to tie multiple organizations to services.
It's often, I mean, trying to be perfect in how you organize the data is you'll kill the data managers. Like I think this is why we only have it as a text field, because it captures enough that you can sort of get needed data out of it. It's dangerous to try and have perfect data. And I know that sounds really weird, but it really is. It's very hard on the data managers to do so.
Absolutely, I love that.
Okay. So I made a note as a separate topic, which we may or may not pursue later. I've also added a note against contact here, but we're still expecting that to be a local extension for you and not in part of the.
Yeah, and I mean, it's more, I like to flag it for people maybe that haven't run into it yet, to understand that as an issue that you may or may not eventually run into.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks very much. So I think we've got all that documented. Whilst we've been talking, Devin, who I think has just popped out for a moment, has added
No,
this address.
I'm back.
Oh, well done, Devin. And you've added this address table, which supersedes
Which I
physical
think-
address above it and
yeah.
postal address below it, yeah?
Ideally, that was my intention, and I just, all I did was copied postal address and added location type to it. And also removed addresses 3 and 4. I don't know if we want an address 2 line. It says deprecated here in the notes. Although
No, I believe that was done for international reasons. We found workarounds.
for the
Yeah,
deprecation of 2.
Sorry, what?
Sorry.
We were adding mail care of, right? We discussed that quickly last time.
Yeah, we have an attention. Is that different than mail
Yeah,
care of?
same thing.
Yeah,
Yep, that's
so yeah,
fine.
we've got an attention. Yeah,
It's-
and so
It's a nitpicky detail, but location type should actually be address type, or just type, should it not? Because you can have, it's a
yeah,
one-to-many
address type,
relationship.
address type.
Yeah.
Good call.
Boom.
And I guess the question is do we, does this all look good? If so, great. Also, just how many address, do we want address 1 and address 2? I mean, I certainly see why address 2 would be of use. I mean, that's like your suite, right? Apartment suite.
We use broken down addresses like number, suffix, street name, street type, street direction. So
Right,
the lines don't
yeah,
make a lot of difference to me, but most of the systems we interact with, if they use multi-line, use 2. Plus, you know, secondary ones for things like attention would appear in a different line. We have separate lines for post office box. Not that it matters, but just to put it out there again,
yeah.
we have separate lines for a few other things that are separate. We consider separate fields, post office box being a significant one for postal address specifically.
Does anyone on this call remember why line 2 is deprecated in the first place?
I think there was a deprecation spree because it was originally lines 1, address 1, 2, 3, and 4. And I think it just got caught up in the spree. In the deprecation spree, but maybe I'm wrong.
And Devin, this is wrong, isn't it? This is not deprecated, yeah?
Yeah, these are descriptions, I think. This might have happened between 2.0 and 2.0.1.
Right. So,
Mike, does
okay.
the UK use 2 lines?
Does the UK
Sorry,
use 2 lines? Is that what you asked?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good question.
There's a UK, I see 2 lines quite often, I think including in gov.uk stuff, yeah.
All right, cool.
Yeah.
I see no problem with bringing it back, certainly.
Okay.
It is used in most of the other systems I interact with, so I always have to concatenate those 2 values down. So this would be convenient to have it back.
Yeah, so I think we like it. Right, so
Right.
we're all, so do we like this? Is this our table, our address table?
Yeah, and I think we do, and we're saying if Kate's separate fields will remain with Kate, but not with the standard in general, if you're happy with that.
Yep, just throwing it out there that we've got more.
That's worth noting, because if people come back later and say we want this, we'll remember that you'd also wanted it, and you know, if there's a weight of opinion, we could add it to the standard. Right. Okay. So we're jumping over postal address because we've just merged it with address. So that takes us on to schedule. Now, 2.01, as I recall, combined regular schedule with holiday schedule, because the standard, whose name I've forgotten, ICAL is it, standard for address, and the R rules, RFC, lets you define all of that sort of thing. So this should reflect what's in iCal. And if something's not in iCal, we should be getting rid of it. And I think that was basically what the decision was. I think this is one case where we've got an enumeration which probably should exist in the core HSDS rather than in just an application profile because it's part of iCal. But otherwise, I think if I'm going to suggest that we just stick with iCal as we are down here and go right down to these additional fields, which I'd like to talk through if no one's interrupting about anything above that. The schedule link, this arises in particular, well, it arises from people that are using the Open Active standard in the UK, which has been extended to add a booking system. And we're looking very much at migrating Open Active records to Open Referral because Open Active is concerned with sports and recreation, but they're a subset of records in general. But we don't have any booking equivalent. And the intention here is for somebody to say, if you want to go ahead and book, here is a URL at which you can make a booking. And if somebody publishes and wants to provide that URL and, you know, takes a booking fee from it, you know, we're comfortable with that. So there is a strong opinion in the UK that we add this optional field of a link to where you can either make a booking or see a breakdown. So if this says this event takes place every Thursday evening, it could give you each Thursday evening as a separate entry with, you know, this class is going to be run by this person on this night or whatever. Yeah, so no objections to adding schedule link.
That's really interesting. I have thoughts, but I don't want to take up time with it right now. Maybe it's at least part of the extension though.
Okay, great. If you want to add a topic and cover it later, but if you're comfortable that it stays in, Skylar, that's great.
Yeah, I'm comfortable having it there, but I'll definitely open a topic in the forum and discuss that a little deeper. I see some potential conflicts.
Right. Okay, thank you. Attending type, again, is something from the UK. How to attend this service. Like, you know, do you need to make a booking? Do you need a referral or whatever to this particular event? I think people were comfortable that this could be done via service or other attributes, via attributes against this, unless there is a general need for a general consensus that this ought to be part of the core standard. I know it is being used in the UK.
I mean, I guess I wonder, I haven't looked at Open Active in a long time. I wonder if there's a need to create a binding between, basically an interoperability between the event model and Open Active and, you know, the Open Referral. Because I mean, a schedule is really, I mean, this is supposed to be is that what you were talking about when it came to scheduling? I mean, basically, you know, I mean, it seems like events would be appropriate and like would make a lot of sense to connect, you know, as like a one-time instance, right? As opposed to like a recurring scheduled service delivery, whatever.
Well, an event system, I've rolled a couple of event systems, and now I've rolled, you know, a search engine for HSDS, and their use cases and requirements are quite radically different most of the time. So I forebode a black hole of work coming down the pipe if we try to modify HSDS to also facilitate events.
I think
and-
Open Active is an event model.
Yeah, it is. And my comment on Open Active was specifically with reference to this schedule link, and basically to say, look, we're not concerning a schedule record here is, this record, this event happens with this frequency at this time. The Open Active will look at each instance of that schedule,
Right.
go into some detail, and allow a booking against any one of those. And I think, I'm saying we don't touch each instance of a schedule, and we don't touch the booking side, but we just provide a link out. So somebody can use that to, a web page which talks about it, or to, something that comes from the Open Active standard or another standard. All I'm saying is we need some kind of placeholder for a link to something which goes into more detail than Open Referral ever intends to.
Well, yes. Yeah, I still see utility in scheduling link. I could see that having utility even in a clinical setting. Although if we have to tie it to different time sets, then there could be redundancy, because many of those are going to have the same scheduling endpoint, no matter what the schedule is. And that's kind of where I started to be concerned about it. And that actually starts to open up a whole other can of worms, which we're not going to go into for this version of the specification, but it's like, I'm beginning to see a need for a normalized URL table, kind of like the phone table is, because an organization in that capacity is starting to have a lot more URLs around stuff. They need to be able to list different virtual points where people can interact with them, as opposed to just one. But it's a whole nother conversation I don't want to have.
It is, and there's been a lot of comment on whether or not Open Referral just provides one link out somewhere from where the other links can be maintained, or
Right.
Open Referral itself keeps those links. So it may be a topic in its own right.
Yeah.
This may relate to the issue that I've been starting to put on the agenda with regards to endpoints, which would be a different kind of URL. The location at which they can receive encrypted communications. But that's
Okay.
largely in the future, but it's definitely something that the healthcare sector in the US is clamoring for. Even though, as far as I can see, I don't know any social service providers that are using that kind of thing.
Interesting.
Greg, if
So-
you, like others, can add to topics, that'd be nice to keep it in one place.
Mhm.
We came on to attending type, and we were saying, for this scheduled set of events, do you need to book, or do you just show up, or do you need a referral? And my question is, should that be part of the core HSDS or not?
Or
Yeah.
extended.
I would, my 2 cents is to extend it or to put it as a link.
Okay. So
But
we're
I'm not going to die on the sword on that one. I mean, especially if there's consensus that it's useful broadly.
okay. Let's. So I think. Oh, you just put a yes.
I think as in a full. I think he's fine. Sounds like Skylar's fine with it being in the full extension, but not that maybe the core isn't not necessary in the core. I can certainly see how it could be of use, from an extended perspective, and
Sure.
I don't think it conflicts. I mean, I've certainly been in a situation where I've wanted a typology for a schedule line. So I'll take that for that beyond a note.
Okay, great, thanks. So we're saying that's in, whereas the next one, I think the recommendation, and this is any access restrictions for the service, for this particular scheduled service, where we're saying that we could keep as a separate attribute. That's the recommendation. So I don't want to spend time on this unless others think it should be part of the core.
Or link to the accessibility table. And we already have a table for this data. But,
yeah,
yeah.
and this is kind of more broader than that, but yeah,
Oh, okay.
it would, yeah. Okay, so we're keeping that out. So we're accepting the recommendation for that. And then notes, which is basically human readable notes on the schedule, which there is some demand for those things that we just don't pick up as.
Yeah, it's useful. I mean,
Do
broadly
you
useful.
use that? Do you use that distinctly from description?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've definitely notes for like this could be things like use the back door on Thursdays.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? For this like scheduled item.
Gotcha.
Thanks, David. Yes, use the tradesman's entrance. Right. Okay. Right. Fine. So we're on to funding, and sorry, I've jumped. Right. Well, we don't use funding in the UK, but although we did include it in our initial extension, and we linked it just to service, not to organisation. But we need non-UK people to tell us if we need to keep it, and certainly the recommendation was that we do keep it as it stands. Is it used in the US and Canada?
We use funding.
Great.
Yep.
Okay, then we keep it. Thanks, Kate. Right.
Anything else? Like, do you have other fields for funding?
So ours is both an enumeration and a text. So ours is sort of a complex field, but we export it as just a text, just like we kind of bring it all together and just export it as a blob. But basically they have to pick a category like government, and then within that they would specify the branch, or they would pick United Way, or they would pick from a sort of set number of things, so that it's really easy to get stats and information on funders.
I mean, I certainly think I've never used funding. I can certainly see why it would be interesting. And I feel like if no one's using this table, then maybe we should add a topic to like, how do we make funding a useful table?
I just had my first
Uh-huh.
client sign up that's using it extensively.
What'd you say?
I just had my first data set come in that's
Oh.
using it extensively.
Just
So-
just those 4 fields.
Yep.
If I recall correctly, this was something that we initially modeled after AIRS, but I think then AIRS might have deprecated it, I think because they found that nobody was using it.
It's hit or miss. It's one of the fields that it's often there in the database, but whether or not it gets filled out and whether or not it gets updated is kind of questionable. So it's there often, but after
Yeah,
that,
I think it's potentially very valuable for like,
Yeah,
especially
that's-
for research, but I don't know that it gets actually used. So
That's the advantage of the checkboxes. That's literally why we have the enumeration. Because if you take the organization and you put 10 checkboxes in front of them, they will check it off. But if you ask them to type out their funding information, they will not do it. They will willingly click a bunch of boxes. And so it's much easier to collect the information. Just practical experience there.
Yeah, that's great feedback.
That's really useful, Kate. So what I've done is suggested we're keeping it as it is and added a topic where we can look at how it could be more useful. And we take some of your experience from that, Kate, at that stage. Is that all right?
Yeah.
You're saying at this stage, you just take that mass of fields and you make one blob out of it and you put that in the source fields, do you?
So, well, when I export that data right now, I to a system that doesn't have the detail that we have, we just could like blob it all together and export it. I think it actually might even get attached onto a different field at the moment, because we only have, I think 2 of the 3 places we regularly exchange data with have the field, so.
Okay, right, thank you. I mean, we certainly have use cases where people want to say, well, what's the demand for services of particular types versus what do we fund? And, is there a mismatch? But it would be useful to get some experience, some knowledge from what you're doing in the States with that, because we've not really explored it in practice.
So
And we
I
have-
am hearing that maybe this is part of the full spec, but not core.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
what, I think that's where we're at right now.
Yeah.
And I think we'll keep it in for, I think it's definitely, and I see that the topic was added, which is great. I mean, I think it's definitely worth an iteration, proper iteration in the future. And speaking of things that are worth a proper iteration in the future,
Eligibility.
Dun, dun, dun.
Dun, dun, dun. I know that's exactly what I was hearing.
And I'm hoping this is going to be a lot simpler than we were hoping, because then it could be, because it's kind of an all or nothing thing. And my understanding from prior discussions was that, you know, we've already discussed the minimum age and maximum age in our discussion of services, and we decided that this is a bit of an exception, and those should be fields in the services table, not necessarily filled in, but, you know, optionally there, and that the rest of eligibility for this stage just comes down to service taxonomy terms. So that's, in fact, it's actually, I think we're now calling them attributes of services, of type, a linked type of eligibility. So we're saying, you know, you just use those attributes to define any eligibility you want. And we'll come back at a later stage to look at the detail, like how you combine those, like with your ands and your ors, or even something more sophisticated, like if this, then that, and if not, then something else. And the kind of machine-driven languages which can be used to define rules models in far more detail than a tabular data structure can attempt to.
That said, I love what you've done here. This is great. I actually personally want to keep this table. It's an artifact of 2-in-1s, I think, but they think about our eligibility very separately from taxonomy, unless you're in the Y codes, which a lot of them aren't.
The Y
And
codes aren't enough on their own though. Like they're
They're not,
great,
no,
but they're
no.
not sufficient.
Yeah,
I-
that was gonna be my,
we're ditching them.
I don't know if then now is time to discuss this, but I have large concerns about taxonomy and eligibility and target terms and eligibility. That's a big deal.
Can
Yeah.
the 2-in-1 and AIRS folks give us a very quick introduction to the Y codes? I know what you're talking about, but others might not.
So within the 2-in-1 LA County taxonomy, which technically actually is not the AIRS taxonomy, but that's a different discussion. There are Y terms, so we call them target terms. Their code begins with Y. They are a separate sort of subset. They're the 11th category. They are treated differently than the rest of the hierarchy. They don't need to be as strictly ruled in terms of customization rules and double indexing and things, but you use them generally to connect to service terms to further explain what the service is and further define it within the term structure. So if it's usually population based or age based or who it's targeted at, but the way that it's used varies very broadly across the network, across 2-in-1s, across aging and disability organizations, et cetera, and how systems accept them. Sometimes they're physically connected to a service term, other times they're left floating, sometimes they're not used at all. So there's a lot of variation, but the biggest thing is a target term does not equal eligibility.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's describing the type of person for whom this service is generally for, but it's not a rule.
It's not a rule, never is a rule.
Yeah.
What-
It often matches, like in a simplistic way, if you look at it, you look at the service description and then you look at the Y terms that might be used, it might line up really, really pretty. But it's never a consistent rule, and it never necessarily covers the entire eligibility options.
So when you're saying it's not a rule, are you saying it's not sufficient to be a rule, or it's just a guide, like it might be the intended audience for a service, but not the mandated audience?
Probably, yeah, a guide.
Okay. so because the way the UK people would handle that was say, we've got intended audience taxonomy terms and we've got eligibility terms, and they might be the same term, or they might not, but they're different link types to the same type of service. Now that's different from what we've got in the chat, where counselling plus youth. So we may do, counselling for youth and ECT for old people or whatever, but we're not talking about those combinations. So
there's two things I love about what I'm looking at right here. And also a note. One, if we're going to add the eligibility field, it needs to be named something different, because we're going to run into the can't have duplicate field and table names issue. So that can just be, name, description, something like that. It does adding minimum age and maximum age here mean that we don't have to add it to the service attributes?
Yes, Skylar, I think we're proposing something more radical. One, we're proposing, and this could scare you, dropping the eligibility table, minimum max and age going in service, and all other eligibility terms going in the attributes against taxonomy terms. So for the case of youth, we would have an attribute of intended audience type, an attribute link type of it, intended service, intended audience linked against the service.
So you are still talking about deprecating eligibility.
Yeah.
For now, temporarily.
I mean, I could see bringing the whole lot into the program table before I could see dropping it. Like just having eligibility as a field in program, I'm more comfortable with that. And minimum maximum age, which I've already expressed that I feel that's critical. Rather than just, I feel like making it some unnamed service attribute loses the importance and significance of that field. It's not that it has to be anything other than a text field. It's that is like absolute high level required prime information that must exist about every single program, and having it not exist as even just a text field in the program is problematic just from a priorities point of view.
Okay, Kate, and I share your concern that if we took that approach, we wouldn't have a text field. Took the recommended approach, we wouldn't have a text field. Is the text field against the program sufficient, or should it also, or instead be against the service?
I use program and service interchangeably. What I mean is the service. Sorry,
okay.
We have terminology problems, right? Like we actually use organization location service in my database. The one I work with uses program. I already munge those up a lot, so I apologize. What I mean, I never mean what program is in open referral. I don't use it all. I don't care about it. It could go away. It would not make a difference to my life. I only ever mean service.
Okay, you might have to keep reminding us of that, Kate. That's brilliant. So the proposal we have now is that we add the eligibility string field as an option against service, along with that minimum age and maximum age. And otherwise we proceed with dropping eligibility in favor of attributes with specific taxonomy terms, including these Y codes for intended audience.
Mike, you got to bear with me for a sec, because I'm feeling really dumb on this one, but I have to think this through real quick so I understand it.
You no need to be quick, Skylar. It's quite important.
So I've got two data types that I have to get into this database. Really three that emerge from my client data, all of the client data consistently. There's the taxonomies, which is the standard. Those clearly go into the taxonomy table. I link up to them. We're golden. Those are of type 211 taxonomy. Then they have enums. Instead of using Y codes, which we were talking about, or in addition, they're all adding separate columns that track things like focus population and age group and stuff. Those are pick lists inside their source system. So what I'm doing at the moment is throwing those into the taxonomy table also, just the shortened enum list, linking to it, and giving it a type of whatever it is, Washington 21 age groups, for example, so that I can pull it back.
That's what we've been doing too, just throwing it out there.
And is that what you're suggesting?
Yeah,
Yes.
there are, yes, this link type is slightly different, but that's exactly what we're proposing. If you've got enums, you can add them as a particular type of taxonomy term, just as if you've got 211 codes or Y codes or UK service type codes or whatever else. And so you can add URIs if you've got them, but if you haven't got them, you don't have to. Yeah,
and so you're throwing the maximum age at the link point because different services might link to the same taxonomy or pick list option, but for different age groups. Is that what you're doing?
I think what we're saying is maximum age is an exception to where we're using taxonomies. We are not using taxonomies for maximum age. That doesn't preclude you from doing it if we're saying the maximum age is 99 and the minimum age is 16, but you've actually got two groups within that. You could use that with taxonomy terms if you wanted, but we're still saying for the service table, maximum age and minimum age are two new numeric fields.
So this is where I kind of trip on myself because now what I have to do is whenever I'm pulling in a link, I have to do some fall through logic and be like, okay, is there min max age? Because if there is, this is just an age bracket. If there's not, then I should look for an associated ID to go find a taxonomy. That's beyond, well, I mean, I don't know. I suppose I could do that with just SQL, but it gets a little hairy. It's kind of like, I feel like at that point, those min max age things should be on a record dedicated to them instead of just kind of munching them into a link table.
So, go ahead.
I think what the future needs to hold is something that can hold max minute age as well as other complicated, probably in a JSON structure, other complicated rules or other rules, that can support, a broader set of eligibility criteria and more specifically, but that we don't have that now, and that would require some kind of another kind of standards definition work stream around how to best do that.
I'm going to propose something too radical, and I know it, and please shoot me down. But Mike, in the interest of preventing having to fix our data later, because we know there's only a short-term solution here, what if we just skip to the punchline and adopt OpenActive's eligibility criteria and say, hey, let's store JSON blobs from OpenActive as a value that we can use in term taxonomy or something, and do our ages that way?
Well, I mean, I don't think that forcing that across all the systems is practical. So to take a step back, I work a lot with the data managers, and so I am an unintentional advocate for data managers in particular, and the work that they have to do, and then also the people retrieving the data. And so when you look at something like min or max age or eligibility in general, there's two reasons for this information to exist. One is to filter the information so that you get a reasonable list of services to find a service. And one is to accurately describe the information so that when you have identified a potential list of records, you have easy access to determine which of that smaller list you have retrieved truly applies to the client that you're trying to target. And I had mentioned earlier that perfect data is a problem, and it literally is. It is a problem for data managers because the level of effort required to get perfect data is not manageable. It's absolutely not manageable. They literally can't get the information accurately from the program people, like the organizations themselves. They cannot get that information, and keeping it accurate and completing it in a timely manner is unrealistic. And so there has to be compromises about what we keep in order to make it practical to get accurate information that can be entered quickly, with asking the least possible of the organizations who are supplying the information, because they will give you literally the absolute minimum they can get away with. So when I look at something like minimum and maximum age, yeah, the program might be like for children 0 to 6 and parents. So technically, there's a whole realm of teenagers that probably don't belong in this program, but I'm still going to have minimum 0 and maximum, like on endless. Like I'm just going to have it be open to identify that in a search, because it doesn't matter. I'm only using minimum and maximum age in order to cut down the records that are retrieved by the person who is trying to identify an appropriate service by that client. Then in writing for the person trying to make the match, when they look at those shortened results, they need to be able to have accurate information, which can just be text description, does not need to be perfect. It will say for parents of children ages 0 to 6 and their children. And that is enough for the person taking the call to make the referral. And that, right?
Yeah.
That's what I'm getting. So
Yeah.
I encourage
think
you
we-
all to just not worry
Yeah.
about it.
And I
Okay.
would support that, Kate. We've now got eligibility as a string where we can clarify that. We've got minimum, max, and age, and certainly we've got developers who say, I just want to do a filter on an integer, please. That does not preclude Skylar from saying, I'm going to leave these fields as null and I'm going to use taxonomy terms. And in a later version where we've discussed eligibility in more detail, having a blob which conforms to some kind of XML or JSON standard or whatever, which gives a fuller machine code, but it still supports the rather simpler instance that Kate's just described.
So I don't have any issue having the min-max fields. I'm a little wigged out about having them in a link table. I would rather see eligibility stay and the min-max fields be here so we can go retrieve them easily. But I'm not going to.
A link table, where they're essentially coming out of a link table and they're going in the service table.
Yep, I think personally, and for what it's worth, I love putting minimum, maximum, and a text eligibility for the clarification of the person making the referral all into the service table. I 100% support that.
The service attribute table.
No, the service.
No, the
table.
service table.
Well, that's what you're doing.
Yeah.
Well, then I'm just totally misunderstanding. I thought it was going into the service attribute table, and I was like, no.
Everything except for those 3 fields is in the service attribute, but those 3 fields are promoted to the service table.
Oh, I totally missed it. Then I have no issues whatsoever.
Brilliant.
Thanks, guys.
Okay,
I'm sorry.
so Devin, we've got that.
I'm
conclusion.
ready. Okay, hold on.
No, that was a really useful discussion. So these 3 blue fields are in the services table. Everything else is dropped in favor of service attribute or just attribute. I didn't get on to explaining this link type, because this link type is not the same as the taxonomy you're referring to. It's whether or not your taxonomy term describes eligibility or intended audience or accessibility or you name it. It's because you might link, different terms from different
other tables.
Same service. What type of attribute you're talking about, and what is it you're describing, and are you describing the service or are you describing the contact or the location or the organization? That's what link type is telling you.
I like all of this. One concern, mild, is if we add a string field called eligibility to the service table, if we call it eligibility, then it kind of undermines eligibility living also potentially in taxonomy terms.
No, I don't think so. It's it becomes a backwards compatibility thing for me, because every single data set I have is in transition towards using more pick lists. As they create them, we add them back into our data, but they also have a fallback text field that's just unavoidable. So I mean,
maybe we change it to just the field name from eligibility to eligibility detail, eligibility note, eligibility description, eligibility, something that isn't
So
Yeah.
it's,
Eligibility.
I don't view them as in conflict only because to me, that eligibility text field is literally the thing that the person making the referral is going to read to decide if that is an appropriate service for the client. All of the
So
other
for
stuff is great for
eligibility-
helping retrieve it,
Right.
but
So-
that eligibility field to me is, this is the thing the person reads and says, does my client qualify to access this program?
But
So
for,
is
for,
there
for
any
systems,
objection to calling it
Hmm.
eligibility text rather than eligibility then, if that helps?
or description, I think eligibility description would fit well.
Any of those.
I mean, the way we currently deliver eligibility is, you know, through this taxonomy terms concept. And so eligibility is a category of taxonomy terms, and then we display, you know, children, whatever, you know, without
I would just
insurance.
leave it very generic because different people will use it in slightly different ways, but the necessity for having that bucket, I think, is without dispute.
Right, so we need implementation notes about how it should be used and that it shouldn't be seen as an alternative to taxonomy terms. Okay,
Well,
No,
can we call it eligibility description? Instead of just eligibility as a string?
any objections?
No
No,
objection.
yeah, looks like we can then, Devin, so I'll leave you to note that. Thank you very much. Service area. So service area, and
This is all good.
This is another
Okay.
big one. This is another potentially, I mean, I'm very happy
Yeah.
that we got through eligibility as we did. Service area is another
yeah,
genuine,
and
a
I
genuine
think
one.
it's a problem that applies at both sides of the Atlantic and probably across the Pacific as well, which is that your nearest service is not necessarily the one that you can use. And we certainly have it with London broken into 33 different municipalities. And the clinic down the road may not be the one I'm eligible to use because of my residency requirement.
Right.
Indeed, I had this problem on gov.uk earlier in the week, and they said their programmers sort of gasped when I said you can't just use a Google Find Nearest. So the intention of this, and I think this has already existed in HSDS, is to have a service area. But in HSDS, it was purely a string. We've extended it in the UK to have the extent. Now, and I think we've had some discussions with Skylar and others about this. So essentially, the extent defines the geographical polygon of the area where you're allowed to access this. Now, in the UK, we have portals which give all of these URIs, so you can look up the URI and you can find the GeoJSON or the KML, which defines the area of each administrative area. And we have portals where you can define your own if you've got specialist areas. But that URI is optional. But the intention is we have this extent field, and if you want, you can slap in your GeoJSON or your KML, and the extent type will tell you whether it's GeoJSON, KML, TopoJSON or something else, or just plain old text. And that supplements what we've got at the moment. So people who don't have that can still stick to what HSDS does at the moment.
I love it. 2 thumbs up for me. We should just rename service area because it's the duplicate table name is description or something like that, especially since it's intended to be plain text.
Yeah, so I think the proposal, Skylar, was just to call it name. Yeah, you happy with that?
Yeah, name.
Or-
Yeah, that's fine. I'm not a stickler about the heuristics of the names at this point. So yeah.
Okay, so are we all agreed on that?
Yeah, our system is totally different. We have an OP. I know, I'm not gonna, you don't have to do what I do. So we have an open source. So here is the most obnoxious thing about Canada. Our postal code database and all that sort of stuff is all licensed. It is not free, even though the government owns it and could make it free. It is paid and not accessible in general
that
to the
possible?
population because
Ridiculous.
reasons. It's infuriating. So we have developed an open source geographic system. It's a taxonomy with all of the things you would expect in a complex taxonomy, describing areas, their relationship to one another, being able to create areas out of other areas and name them as health regions and this and that and the other. It deals with like overlapping boundary areas. It does not use polygons because we've had the system for 20 years. That was not, we did not have any kind of, we didn't even have latitude and longitude available to us as a search option at the time. So we don't use anything like this. But what we do end up having to do to go to other systems is crosswalk. So
Yeah.
This is not the time to have that discussion, but every time I have to exchange data with someone else, we have to crosswalk. So all I ever care about is that crosswalk and how I get access to people structures so that crosswalks can be built. And our repository of our geography actually allows you to put a crosswalk into it and export it so that you can share data with someone else who has a different geographic system than you do.
That's rough.
Basically, it's like there's crosswalk management in our open source repository for our geography that other people can upload their own crosswalks to our system and back and forth.
It's a crosswalk.
Yeah.
Is that same as a transformation?
Yes, it's basically a way of saying, this is equivalent to this, and they're never one-to-one. There's no, the crosswalk has to support levels not agreeing with one another. So it's quite complex. It's just, I don't even, I mean, I don't want to ask anyone else if you don't have to deal with this, like good on y'all, but we do. We do have to deal with this, and it's a nightmare.
In future, you might want to, I mean, we've got a service where you can define areas and their polygons, and although it's only used in the UK, it will work with any latitudes around, around the world. Likewise, OpenStreetMap lets you do this. So, one day you might want to use one of those.
Your country fits in like the region I live in.
Yeah,
like it's just not, it's not practical. Like no one can do that.
I want to.
You don't have to do very refined polygons. You can do the whole of New Brunswick as a rectangle if you want.
Right, but people have, like, we have down to the neighborhood level. Like the little neighborhood I live in, the city block is a community in our system.
Okay, but so look, we'll leave you with that and sympathies, but there are lots of ways of going to going to that over time. But I think we're agreed it's only because your system is so old and has been going so successfully so long that you have these legacy problems.
Yeah, sort of. I mean, that this wouldn't work. Like there's no system I'm aware of in Canada that uses this, that uses what you're talking about. None. Like I literally am aware of none that do that, because it's complex the way that all of the boundaries work around regions here. I'm just not even aware of anything else doing it now. So yes, it's part of it is how we grew up, but also it's more complicated than that.
Yeah, and Howard is also saying in the chat that OpenStreetMap is an option, but I think if you want to discuss that, make a separate topic of it. Otherwise, you just have our sympathies. Right, so we've done service area, yeah, and I think we've approved what's there with the exception.
So just with service area, we're connecting it to service ID, we're naming it, we're giving it a description field, an extent, which is what the extent is, the GeoJSON.
Polygon in some
right.
some language, yeah.
Some polygon.
And the extent type says which language.
Yeah, and then a URI, and if there is like a reference, great. Yep.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, so we've done well. Does anyone want to take a 5-minute break?
Yeah, that's fine.
Does anyone? Yeah. Do you want to take a 5-minute break? If not, I say we keep going. But I just try to refresh my coffee. So, but yeah, maybe we take the 5-minute break.
Okay. So shall we come back at 17 minutes past the hour,
Perfect.
right?
Sounds good.
Well, Devin, we made it through eligibility, so we might actually make it all the way through today.
I think we're gonna make it all the way through.
Hey,
I
it's,
don't think there's anything super controversial left, really.
you'll see.
I feel like metadata could get spicy.
Yeah, it could, but
Here's a pet peeve. Can we reduce accessibility for disabilities to just accessibility? Table name is so freaking long.
Yeah, I agree. I'd love to do it.
if we're going to push the version number up, we might as well make it
That's
worthwhile.
where I'm at. That's where I'm coming from.
And yeah, we've got not quite up 17 minutes past yet.
It shouldn't bother me, but every time I have to type that table name out, I just groan inside a little bit.
Yeah. Right, 17 minutes past. Okay, required document and payment accepted. The proposal in both of these cases is that they be deprecated in favor of service attribute, which I think we're just calling attribute now. You may or may not recall from last time, we said with attribute, as well as having a taxonomy term, which could be anything like, you know, just this is a required document. We optionally have a value field. So if we did get rid of these two, we're basically saying, you know, we may have an attribute of a required document with a value of a string which defines that document. But otherwise, we drop these two tables. Are there objections to dropping required document or payment accepted?
With the caveat that they have a field added to the service model, is that what I heard?
Yeah, the value field is added to the service attribute.
So that
To service attributes, not service table. You're saying that it
Right.
should,
Correct.
Yeah.
because
That's
so
right.
so documents is like a top level errors field. I know
Yeah.
for most of our clients, it's a required field. I would be fine with it going into the service table as an optional field for those that don't want to do it. But I'm a bit, I don't know. Again, having it sort of not exist when it's a top level mandatory thing for most of my clients is maybe,
I'm
I
in the
don't know
same
about
boat.
that.
My clients are actually using these, but that said, maybe it's part of an errors profile or something, you know, like I could see that
Yeah,
happening.
but if,
I think.
if it,
Sorry, go ahead, Mike.
sorry, and Kate, the problem with adding it to service is that would allow only one. If
Right.
it is, and to put it in profile, it would have to be in the core. So if people are using it, we can override this recommendation and we can keep it.
But this is, well, okay, but if we add a value field to the service attribute, now
Yeah.
we're back to adding data to a link table, right? So we have to
Yes.
do a check. Be
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
I just don't love that part.
No.
I
And
don't care about the table.
And I think Kate is saying the same thing because it is of so much importance. So, you know,
It is
I
a
think,
key field.
yeah, it is. So
I mean, I think if we had a stronger culture around user documentation recommendations, then it wouldn't be surprising to put, you know, required fields. You know, it's just like you need to use the service attribute table to define these required elements. But I don't think we have that capability at this point. Like, I don't think we have that culture. So maybe we just leave it in.
Yeah, when we were reviewing this, we weren't exposed to anyone that used it strongly, and now we are. So we're overriding the original recommendation. We're saying we're going to keep it in the extended, but not in the core. Yeah.
That would be, I mean, that's
Sounds-
great by me. Yeah.
Sounds good to me.
Okay.
As long as it doesn't disappear
apply?
altogether.
Yeah.
So thank you for that. That's why we're having these meetings. Does the same apply to payment accepted, or is payment accepted one we can drop in favor of an attribute?
Slightly less use, but still, I think maybe only one of my clients isn't using it.
I think that's hit or miss from my knowledge. It's an optional field.
Yeah,
But
I see almost no use of it. And for us, it's just a text field in the service.
Yeah, that's fair. It
So
is being
maybe-
used as a text field.
Maybe we can try our service attribute method for payment accepted.
I'm cool with that.
Great. Okay, so we've got one in and one out. Excellent. Thank you very much. So language is the next one.
Oh,
I
Oh,
don't.
sorry.
Why is that controversial, Kate? Because I think
So-
we're not proposing any particular changes. I
No.
think.
So literally I believe that the wording of the standard is languages other than English, and that's a problem here.
Yeah.
We can't have that be the like it's languages. Every like if your
Yeah.
language is English, it says English.
Agree with
It's a
that.
bilingual country, and you're in trouble if you do that here. So we can't have the assumption that it serves English if it doesn't say English. So that is my beef. It's
Right.
it's not about the field, it's about the description of what the field means. Literally says languages other than English. I have a big beef with that, especially if this is an international standard. That's not
Definitely.
okay.
I'll
Yeah,
support
so-
that beef.
So we're staying, I mean, we have, Welsh people would say the same in the UK. So we need to be careful then that in describing the standard, we're just saying it's language. If a particular implementation is for a country where there's only one language and they want to determine that that language is the default and not say it anywhere, that would be up to them, yeah? But we're not saying in the standard documentation that somehow English is a default internationally. Yeah. Is that
It sounds like a documentation update, partially.
So we also, I have more,
Noted.
I keep more data than this, a lot more than just the language. So not saying that it should be to the level that we do, where on ours, they can pick a language and then say, print materials, in-person service, blah, 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 for each language. Like that's not what I'm talking about. But at least the ability to put a note clarifying the level of service available in that language, because sometimes people say, we Ukraine, because they have like a volunteer who comes in for an hour on Mondays that speaks Ukrainian, sort of, because they grew up there till they were 6. Like that, then someone comes to that service thinking that that service is available in Ukrainian at like the level of everybody else, and that's just not the case. We have to have a way to be able to clarify the level of service that's available in that language. It maybe will hardly ever get used, but it needs to be there.
So can we add a note as a string?
Yes.
And
That's what we have.
I'd like to make another suggestion, again, an expansion of this a little bit. Language, of course, is another one of these naming conflicts. I suggest replacing language with 2 fields, code and name or label. So because, and obviously code is going to be ISO, what is it, 639, I think, 1 through 3. We should also update the documentation to include ISO 3 codes for this. Because right now it stops at 2, but I don't believe that encompasses like sign language and stuff, which has been a problem for us.
So
we've not
are you saying that the code, but the code shouldn't be mandatory, right? Because
well, right,
the name needs to be mandatory. That's the important part for the person making the referral. The having the culture code is, I mean, I don't know what I would do with it other than, where people spell things differently. That gives you an ability to match. We have that for all our checklists, but
that's exactly correct. We're internationalizing our systems right now. And so the only consistent thing when you're translating those labels into a bunch of different languages is the code behind the scenes. And everything.
No, though we have that for every enum in our, if you're doing that, you should, I will give you an hour of my time. You should talk to me, because I can probably save you like a month of work if we have an hour conversation.
Please. Please. I'll reach out afterwards. I think I've got your email. Thanks,
Tyler,
guys.
what do we call this field?
For the ISO, I mean code.
I think code's good.
Code. So we've added
ISO 3. Yeah, I think ISO 3. It's the better we can describe it, I think the better.
Yeah, it's going to be the ISO 639, and I'll just put it into chat. It's easier. /3, basically.
I mean, with our system, we have like kind of primary, secondary languages. I mean, that could be fine as a note. We could take an enum in there too if we wanted to offer a taxonomy around language.
Yeah, there's nothing that precludes us using attributes for that if we need. So we've added those 2 fields. If languages merits further discussion at a later date, somebody add it as a topic. Otherwise, we've got this determined for the full extension. And
The only other thing, just right
in
now,
core-
it says that we're going to deprecate location, the connection between language and location.
I wouldn't do that.
Okay. That's
Does
fine. I
it?
mean, we can undeprecate it there.
keep it.
This,
Now it's in full.
And
Yeah.
are all of these things in core as well?
well,
Right
I
now-
think these should be in core. The code note name, but that's just a suggestion for me.
So it's all, so if it's in core as well.
Right now, core is just ID service and language, although language should be language name, right? It should be name, not language.
Just name, yeah, exactly. That would be fine.
And
That's the
that code note and location connection are in extended.
Very help. Thank you very much. Accessibility for disabilities. Right. Apart from trouble saying it, I think Skylar has just said you wanted to shorten the name, which would be quite a radical change. I don't think any other changes are proposed.
I think I brought this up last time.
Oh, right, yeah, it
yeah.
is more disabilities. It's not general accessibility.
Yeah, so there's oh God, this is such a really difficult one. This is on the level of, you know, other incredibly important things. It needs to not just be about physical accessibility. Obviously, it needs to be about various kinds. And the thing that God, I mean, I don't even know how to begin this one. Maybe this is just not the time because there's a bigger discussion that needs to happen on it. But this is a huge compatibility issue between systems in general. And if we can find ways to put some rails around it, and maybe some of that is me, it needs to be a conversation with heirs or I don't know what, but the inconsistency with which accessibility information is defined, it absolutely interferes with people's ability to access services. Like this is a huge, like human rights thing.
Kate,
big deal.
in discussions, you know, I discussed this with an accessibility charity in the UK, with a view to setting up an accessibility taxonomy, and they basically said you can't do that because you know we develop sites, you know, they go out to sites and they if they say something is wheelchair accessible, they say how steep the ramp is and whether the door swings to the open to the right or left and have they got hearing loops, and they show photographs of the parking spaces. So what they asked for and what is proposed here is an accessibility URL, which optionally just goes off to another site where you can get all of that kind of information without trying to encode it within the standard.
But where would that be? I mean, I don't know anyone who's keeping that information. So,
well,
so for
our supermarkets, for instance, commission this organization to go out and do the reviews of them so they can, you know, tell their customers that they have this type of accessibility. And some of our municipalities, our local authorities also commission that and they put it online. I'm not saying it's a required field, but it's certainly something that has been asked for heavily in the UK and gets us round trying to define some very complicated accessibility issues.
Yeah. This is and again, this probably has to go out of this discussion, but just to have it on the record, this is similar to the funding thing that I was talking about, where if you put information in front of people, you will get a better result. And certainly that is the case as well with accessibility. If you say things like, so if you put checkboxes that say fully, partially, or not accessible, people will always say partially or fully, and not thinking about anything specific. If instead you say washrooms, washrooms are wheelchair accessible as a checkbox, or you know, elevators are have braille, or like what if you're very explicit about the types of specific access things that are available at that site, then people can answer those questions. They say, oh, I know the answer to that question. And suddenly they can give you that information when they couldn't before. And again, this is an exchange format. So there's a limit to how much of that conversation takes place here. But that said, this is a humongous issue with data exchange and with data compatibility, because if you have organizations that maintain what is like, it's like having, you know, a person raising horses and a person raising carrots, and like you put them together and go look at my carrot farm, and it's like, but they've got horses, and it makes no sense. Like you put them together in one data set and it's a disaster. And so to ignore it as a disaster and not say we need to have some rails around this field or guidelines is, the information is useless. You can't sell a horse and say 5 carrots a dozen, you know, or $5 or whatever, and it's a horse. Like it's just useless. So if we don't do something to this, then the exchange of this field is useless, and not just useless, damagingly useless to a vulnerable population. I have feelings.
Yeah. I think that this qualifies as a topic.
Yeah.
And so maybe we can.
Yeah.
What should we do?
Well, I would still like to propose that we shorten the name and move the description of what this table's for to documentation, instead of trying to document in table names, because that's not a heuristic that we're using anywhere else per se. But that's just my 2 cents. I'm not going to be a stickler about it.
Is any objections to renaming it as just accessibility? No, so we'll do that. We'll postpone the other discussions. I would like, if there aren't strong objections, to include this accessibility URL, because, you know, Kate, whatever questions you ask, you're not going to ask how wide the door is, and, you know, these things count. And there are sites which have this information in the UK. You know, how we handle it now, you know, more fully in the standard can be a separate discussion.
Oh yeah, no, if you've got it, that's great. I certainly would not want to make it harder to access that information.
Thank you. Yeah, but we've a long way to go. But, you know, people do pay for that, and there are sites with photographs of ways in which it is or is not accessible. Yeah, right. Okay, thank you for that. So longer discussion to come. Right, taxonomy term. Now, taxonomy term is the thing that we will be linking to from attribute.
Yeah.
So this might say that within the local government association service types, we have a term of 632, which is home accessibility aids, for want of a better word, something like that, or care in the home. And we have a URI for that, and we have an identifier to say which taxonomy it's in, which will link to a later table. And we optionally have the parent identifier. So if it's a hierarchical taxonomy, we have that. And in the case of 2.1 of heirs, my understanding is that although the taxonomy itself cannot be publicly shared, you can reference individual items like individual services with a reference to the term, that the heirs term which describes them, and say this comes from heirs. So
well, yeah, the 211 LA. So yes, the data, sharing the data about the actual what they would call indexing information tied to records is allowed. You cannot share the full taxonomy or any of its structures or supplementary information. So you couldn't, for instance, export here anything in that table that wasn't literally in the records that you are distributing. And it cannot contain any of the supplementary information. So including description is probably sketch.
But you can have its name and its identifier. You can have its
name, and I believe I believe the discussion we had before was that we were going to treat linked terms as a term because this doesn't support linking. Is that still going to be the recommended practice, that a linked term becomes a separate entry in this table?
Link doesn't support linking to what?
So linked terms are when you take that Y branch, the one that describes the population and a service term, and you link them together to create a combined term, like youth
Okay,
counseling.
yeah. The proposal, yeah, I'd call that a Boolean and, yeah, and we're saying we're not supporting that at this,
Well,
in this standard, yeah.
There's a conversation happening, Kate, which Greg can speak to this as well. But I have wanted to create a 211 specific profile or an heirs specific profile. Main part of that work would be extending this table to handle the taxonomy better. But I believe there's already a couple of working groups at higher levels that are kind of maybe tackling this or could fold this into their scope of work. So that might be taken care of as a separate application profile, is the short version.
So the taxon, okay, so we have ID, which would be the equivalent of the taxonomy code, correct? And then taxonomy ID, that's the identifier of the system. Sorry, the spreadsheet isn't showing me there we go. Right, so the taxonomy ID would say, the 211 LA taxonomy, for example. And then if I was also using NAICS or some other thing, then it would still all be in this table. And then so uniqueness is defined as taxonomy ID plus ID in this table. Is that what we're saying? Because then how are we referencing the table?
Well,
that's what I want to point out here is if you're using,
we have a separate table in HSDS for the taxonomies themselves.
Yes, but what I'm saying is if you're allowing multiple systems to appear in here, what if you have ID overlap?
Then yeah, it's a combination.
Right. So then the linking needs to reflect that.
Mike, what's your use case in the UK for taxonomy ID? Well, maybe that's the wrong question.
We have every taxonomy has a URI and every taxonomy term has a URI. So, I mean, typically our service types list is LGA services, and it's got a URI of id.esd.org.uk/service. And then we have a taxonomy term, which is id.esd.org.uk/service/123. And yeah, so you've actually, the URI of the term gives us the taxonomy it belongs to, but we're still suggesting these are two separate fields here.
Okay, I think I'm with you. I was going to say, because we've implemented errors in HSDS using, I'm looking at the actual documentation because this one's confusing me. The code is going into term because it says that's the taxonomy term itself, which is a little controversial, but so be it. Description we're using for basically the label that goes with the code. So what otherwise might have been known as the term is a little confusing.
Yeah, I think I'm confused now. Yeah, because and Kate's point was effectively it's the combination of two fields, the taxonomy ID and the ID of the term, or which we may say is the term. It's the combination of those two that identifies the taxonomy term.
Yeah, I've got multiple taxonomies associated with each record and that get exchanged, like that leave my system. So I need to be able to have multiple of them in the same. Now, I mean, I actually don't use integer IDs very much for that. So, but theoretically we could. And so the idea that ID is necessarily unique. Not everyone's using GUIDs. Not everyone is using identifiers that are going to be unique across systems. And so are we relying on ID to be unique across multiple taxonomies? So that's how we're doing our linking?
No, we absolutely should not.
Great point.
I'm not clear, and maybe you can help, Skylar, because there's an internal identifier for each record. There's an identifier for the taxonomy term, and there's an identifier for the taxonomy. Yeah. And then there's the name of the taxonomy term. And I think you were saying you were using term, Skylar, to mean the identifier for the actual taxonomy term?
The code
mean,
branch, right?
Yeah,
I think-
we're trying to shoehorn things here. So I just looked at this spec and I basically said, aha, term is kind of the primary field unless I'm mistaken. So I'm going to put my code in there, the code being something along the lines of LJ-3000, for example. And
Yeah.
then, and then I have a secondary piece of important information, which we use for keyword searching. And that's basically the label that goes with that code, housing
Yeah.
services or something like this. And that's what I put in the description.
And
And,
label is,
I
label
think
is
that-
what Scott would use. So are we saying we're missing a label field here, and the term should be the identifier?
I think we're missing a code field.
That's
personally.
Devin just hit it. If I was going to use something that would be helpful, I'd look at it like languages, which I think pretty well nailed it. You've got a code and you've got the name or the label for the thing, and that
Yeah,
hits
like
that
the
hits
heirs-
theirs at a high level.
Yeah, like the heirs taxonomy is both a UID code that's not human readable and a label that is readable. So I think
Yep.
adding a code, which is not required. But like we
That's
use open
optional.
eligibility often, there's no code for open eligibility terms.
Right.
But I think
But
it's
then we're-
definitely necessary.
And send
then-
that we're saying right now that the each taxonomy term must have a unique identifier within the scope of the data set. We're saying people may have to generate
Right, that
unique
you generate
IDs,
that.
which is
Yeah.
fine
No.
if there's a set, like,
I would say that the uniqueness in our system, at least, the uniqueness is coming from a combination of the code and the taxonomy field value, which says this is the type of taxonomy it is. So I'm
I'm
going
just thinking for the join though, like, because
for the
at
join,
the
we
end, you
need
have
a
to join a
UID.
taxonomy term to something using
Yeah.
you have to
So
have an
that-
identifier for the
So
relationship.
that's what this ID is.
Yeah,
Right, so that's got to be unique in the whole,
Oh, yeah, it is.
across everything.
but that's
Yeah.
What I'm
system
saying.
generated. That's system generated. That ID, Kate, is
Right.
not going to be the taxonomy code.
Right,
gonna
but
be-
that's what I'm saying,
yeah.
but it's still then, it's got to be a GID or something else, because otherwise, if people are just using
I agree with that.
like RSNs, then you're gonna have duplication.
So we're moving to the point of using UUIDs for every primary key in every HSDS table in our system. And I think that's a recommendation for anybody
Yes.
these days. But
Yeah.
it's not necessarily a requirement. Some people are going to be in older systems. Like I can imagine one of my clients using Salesforce. Using a UUID is not optional for them, unfortunately. But so we shouldn't make it a requirement so that they're forced out of spec. But I do think it's a strong recommendation to everybody, right, to use UUIDs for their primary keys now.
Yeah, and indeed, when people are aggregating across multiple data sets, it makes things a lot easier.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've
Does that
added,
answer?
so we're understanding that this ID is for linking within, to the attribute. Code we've added, and term is essentially the label. Yeah.
should we rename it name while we're at it, just
Yeah, you
for
see-
consistency's sake?
Yeah.
Taxonomy term is heuristically correct, but I don't really care either way.
We literally call it term name.
Yeah. Oh, there you go.
It's term name most often.
And the W3C standard is label, but for in SCOS, but it sounds like term is as good as anything, does it?
Or name. They're basically saying that, yeah, name is actually better. So that's cool.
Should we do
Either way.
name? Change the name.
Okay,
Okay.
you want to record that? Okay. Are we otherwise okay with this table? I mean, we'll actually jump on taxonomy itself lower down because it's been added as a new table, but
It has.
Yeah, taxonomy itself is way down here.
What's this for?
Because previously we had a link to it, but we didn't know what it was, and certainly when people are bringing out pick lists of taxonomies, they've had to do a select distinct on taxonomy terms so far from our code, whereas
Right, taxonomy tables are very useful for us to define just what taxonomies are being used here.
So I'm jumping around a bit, but do people have objections to this, or are we comfortable with it?
So,
I need a version number.
Okay,
Nice.
fair.
Yes, good idea.
how, so interesting, because what we're doing is keeping distinct lists. We're not selecting distinct, we're keeping distinct lists in taxonomy term and linking to them because it's a many-to-many relationship, you know? So it functions as both easily.
it's not many to many. One taxonomy has many taxonomy terms.
Yeah, you're gonna
Interesting.
have to repeat the code if it occurs under multiple systems. That was my assumption. Like if you have the same name of term, it's gonna be in there multiple times if it appears in multiple different taxonomies.
If it appears in multiple different taxonomies, but that would be obviated by the taxonomy field itself, which tells you which taxonomy it goes to, right?
Yeah, so I'm just saying that it wouldn't be many to many. Every taxonomy term belongs to exactly one taxonomy. However, the name might repeat. Like the name isn't unique in the.
Oh, this is a whole different level of normalization than I was expecting. This is interesting. So you guys are defining, wow, do we need that level of granularity?
Of which taxonomy system it belongs to? Oh, yeah.
No, of like, you know, a description is shared between, a description in errors is shared between 3 different taxonomies technically. And so we're going to store the description once, you know, the name, but then we're going to.
No, I'm saying we're not going to do that.
Right.
Like it's fine for the term to repeat.
We're just saying that
multiple
the
systems.
taxonomy table is a foreign key on taxonomy term. So if you reference, so up here where we've got taxonomy, if we go all the way back up to taxonomy ID, that is a key onto the taxonomy term, taxonomy table.
Right, and this would allow us. This would allow us to kind of, I mean, one thing it would allow us to do is pre-bake, you know, multiple taxonomies into the system. You know, and let people more easily choose what, you know, what terms they're using, basically.
So if there's 5 taxonomy systems in a database, then there's 5 records in the taxonomy table.
Yes.
You're essentially defining a pick list.
Yeah.
Oh, well, that's awesome. Let's do it.
Okay, so Devin, if you wouldn't mind popping down and recording that we've agreed the taxonomy table, so when we get to it, we wouldn't repeat that. That would be lovely.
I just want to say this is the first time we've had to pop down. I'm just recording that for posterity.
Trying to do it.
And then we're adding a version string.
I've added that row. Yeah. So, I mean, metadata and metadata description. This could be a big discussion.
Wait,
It's
aren't we
not-
at is that where we're at, or are we at link taxonomy?
Well, I've gone back up.
Oh, we dropped that in favor of other.
Remember, I dropped down just because we were talking about taxonomy. So I dropped down, but I've now gone back to where we were.
Yeah, let's just, I mean, link taxonomy right now is dropped in favor of attribute.
Yeah.
Just a plain simple attribute table that can link between any 2 tables, really, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So drop in favor of other attribute, but we knocked out other attribute to just for one single attribute. So
yeah, love it.
Killing off taxonomies, yes, we've killed linked taxonomy. It was introduced in the UK. It was vastly overcomplicated and wasn't used. Right. Okay.
So yeah, wait, I was wrong. Now that I'm looking at things, I'm realizing that I was wrong. Okay, never mind. Keep at it. Never mind. Don't mind me.
No. I appreciate it. So metadata and metadata table description, right? This gives us the ability to record every change. So in theory, you could do a rollback, and you could note things like, was a record deleted? which,
Yeah.
you know, otherwise you would have no way of knowing if it just disappeared from the system.
Yeah.
And you know, this is used by some people, I understand. Bear in mind, we're talking here about an interface standard, you know, not this is not how you define your own database, this is how you interchange data with other people. So it's certainly not used in the UK, but that's not to say we don't want people to use it. And it's distinct from saying when a record was actually approved. You know, we're not saying by virtue of the fact that a field was changed yesterday, the record is up to date and everybody's happy with it, which is why we've had separate fields for assured. But there's a demand to use this, isn't there? Devin, were you going to say?
I was going to say, you know, we've got 8 minutes until 1 o'clock, or at least till the hour. And then I think metadata and metadata table are worth lots of discussion, but that maybe we can spend the rest of our time just knocking out the easy ones. And at that point, maybe metadata is a topic inevitably. And so maybe we can just like
let's add it as a topic, but I mean the proposal is to keep it in the full and not in the core. And if nobody's objecting to that, then if we want to make changes, we can deal with it in a topic later on. But we're not proposing to drop it; it just may not be used.
I propose keeping it. It's about to be the most important table in our system. Yeah.
Right.
Can I just interject there 1 second? Resource ID and resource type are currently unique, which is like a bug that's been reported. Can we just change them to false? Because you can have multiple resource IDs and resource type. I just wanted to get that into this change as one of the, so it's noted here. No, not required, it's unique. I think they are required, but yeah. If that makes any sense, because they're certainly not unique, and it is at the moment, and all the validations going, lots of validation goes on wrong for that. So yeah, so they.
Thanks.
Okay, thanks a lot.
No, that's really useful. Thank you. Obviously this update is an opportunity to fix any kind of typos in the original description.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Cost option.
So we're coming back to metadata because.
Yeah.
Okay. Good.
Yeah, there's a topic, and it looks like you're leading on it. Kate, as with many things.
I'd be open to have a whole separate call just for that one. Like if there was a call, I would be there. Just putting that
I think metadata's got a lot going on, particularly if we're talking about merging. I mean, there's a lot there. So can we just go down to cost option and see if we can get to the bottom before before we close out?
Stretch goal.
Yeah. Now these in blue are things that are added in the UK that and that we want to keep. So I guess I just need to know from outside of the UK if there are objections to it. We're not suggesting any of this is required.
Probably my 2 cents is they're an extension. They're part of the UK extension. I think I would just be using taxonomies for cost option based on any of that type of data that I've seen so far. And then most of my clients are explicitly trying to avoid review at the moment, at least. But those are my use cases. I'm not sure what the others are.
Okay, if we deal with the two separately, cost option. So when you're saying extension, so let's distinguish that from an application profile. An application profile is a filter on the full set. An extension is something that's added locally that might be added in a different way by another local implementation. Yeah.
So these would be part of the full but not core. Then you're right, Mike. Thanks for that. And that would be my recommendation.
Yeah, me too. I mean, I think they're useful and useful to define, but I haven't used either. So I say we keep them in full and we can move on if that's okay with folks.
Okay, right. So that's with you guys too.
Review is not user reviews in our case. A review is some accredited organization says they are happy with this service. So for instance, a local authority might say, we have reviewed this service for data protection reasons or child protection or whatever, and we're happy to recommend it. Or, you know, you might have a professional body that has reviewed something, and some people filter out services, so they only use ones which have a review by a certain organization.
Mike, you know, we have the field for licenses or accreditation. I think we might have landed on one or the other of those, but that seems like the formal method. This seems very
Okay.
This seems very context dependent.
Yeah.
Okay.
And actually, Mike, if it got used in the US, probably it would actually be to get just like layperson reviews. There are some use cases for that, so I could see this being used for that. But yeah.
Yeah, but we're nowhere, the field's just not, people have tried and nothing has, as far as I can see, nothing has succeeded on this. It's
No.
just, this is not, it's speculative.
Okay,
yeah,
so this is for local extension and we're excluding it from the core then?
Yeah.
Okay.
But are we saying, does that mean we don't wait? So it's in the full spec or it's out?
not in, we're saying, and we're saying we're just limiting it to using accreditation for now. And can I add it as a topic for, you know,
Yes.
for later on?
Yeah, topic for sure, but this is just, it's so far beyond where the actual field is that I don't think we should be adding it into the spec. I'd be curious to hear what like Sarah and Kate say, but.
I don't have any real examples to give of its use in my knowledge, so.
Yeah, I mean, it's the kind of thing that like Yelp for social services is something a lot of people say. And then when you think about it for a moment, it's like, oh no, that actually sounds terrible.
Yeah, it does sound terrible. My opinions are all, I think it's horrible, and I just absolutely wouldn't allow it even if my clients asked for it.
Well, that's
But
where,
I think what Mike's use case is, you know, official authorities kind of self whatever. I don't think we don't need to talk more about it.
I wish we could.
There's a lot I want to say about it, and that's why it should be a separate topic.
Yeah, topic. Okay.
Righty-ho. Linked taxonomy, we said we're
about out of time, I think, don't we?
Yeah, I mean, we're nearly there though. Holiday schedule has gone in favor of just schedule because iCal handles both. And then the question is, we've covered taxonomy, but we've not covered organization identifier. Do we want to stop at this point?
What is an organization identifier?
All right, these are the identifiers for an organization. Like this is charity number 123, and it's got this state code, tax code, and it's got this federal code, and it's got this company number, and it's got this tax ID.
Oh, this is a way to append official IDs
I like that.
and URIs to
often for lookup and for deduplication. Yeah,
I like that better than the tax ID and the identification fields on organization and stuff. I think this is much more useful.
Yeah.
So if we were going to adopt this, it is going to end up being another time, isn't it? Because if we were to adopt this, then I would go back and recommend deprecating a few fields in organization, I think. This is superior.
I agree. So this could replace.
We add it, and the recommendation is that other fields be deprecated in due course. So we're keeping the other fields in at the moment, but we're saying that they could be removed in a later version.
Yeah, could replace org IDs and org table.
Tax ID, yeah. Okay.
Tax ID, etc.
We've covered taxonomy and.
What is reference information? Not to be added. Use service attribute if needed.
Okay,
is that the case?
Okay, so that's easy. So we're saying we're not doing it. Thank you very much. We're a minute over, for which I apologize.
But I think we hit, I think we have enough information now to refactor everything, and we can do this again, the whole thing much faster with our refactored approach that we'll send out. And we'll also And I think the only thing that's still kind of up in the air is the metadata. And in fact, if someone, I think Skylar, you said you were interested in hosting a metadata conversation.
I said if there was one, I'd be there, and if it has to be me hosting it to make it happen, I will.
I mean, I think if
Skylar, are we saying that should wait, we should wait on the next version for that, or is that just a topic that would affect a future sort of point version?
Future, I absolutely don't think that we should derail the implementation of this next version with meta stuff, but clearly there's input to be had, and I'm keen to see what the emerging best practices or standards, basically how people are using this are.
I mean, I think if it's going to take us a little bit of time to refactor and get the whole group together. But if you wanted to, Skylar, if you wanted to invite Kate and me and other people to a metadata conversation, I think that could happen simultaneously to our refactoring and this process. And if we could do it quick, then maybe we could get some metadata changes in there.
Perfect. So I'll put together a doodle for this. Kate, I know you want to be there. Devin, Mike, anybody else?
I'm seeing that Kate's gone starting August 17th. So, and it feels like a big topic to try to organize next week.
Well, let's just see if we can do it. I mean, if we can do it, we can do it. And if we can't, we can't.
I'm happy if the purpose of the topic is only to start the exploration of the issue. I mean, if the conversation is just to start discussing. So,
well, I mean,
Greg, we're finished here. I think Howard's just left, but Howard's made notes, and David, I don't know if you've made notes, but we probably need to get together and see how we're going to summarize the main decisions from this, and then if we need a follow-up session to confirm what we've said, as well as Greg consulting other organizations on the recommendations before Open Data Services actually gets to representing this formally.
Right. And so what do you and Devin need to, package this all up, develop a new version?
I think we'll do another version of this spreadsheet with all the notes incorporated in it, maybe including like a change log as well. And I think we should get this group together again to go through the thing top to bottom one more time, which will be faster because it'll just be we'll send it out beforehand. Folks can review if they see anything that they find, not consistent with what they thought was going to happen. Then they can let us know. I think we could have one more get together just so that could maybe be in an hour.
Okay.
Just so that people can say whatever, and maybe we could use that to coordinate and encourage people to organize topics.
Okay.
On the forum, and then at that point, I think we're ready to. After that, I think we're ready to push it to Open Data Services for codification.
Okay, great.
That sound right, Mike?
Yeah, I think we need a narrative as well with it. So which I'd like to involve Howard in, but yes.
Okay, great. And we have a work group meeting 1 week from Monday. And then at the end of that week, Kate's going on vacation. So let's see what we can get done before then.
Perfect.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks all. This is so good.
Thank you.
Sarah, thank you for the recording. Let's be sure to get that up soon.